question. We're going to go through that. We want to get feedback from the folks up here on our U-shaped dais. We want to hear from the community because we have a long ways to go still, believe it or not. Even though we have to get something turned in by the end of the year, we actually still have a long ways to go. The current 30-day public comment period that we're in goes through July 6th. That's where we're taking comments on our website or any other way you want to get them to us. Napkin, carrier pigeon, whatever, we want them. So that's July 6th when that closes. However, we're going to continue to take comments after that because we'll be going to the City Council on July 11th and talking about the comments we've received, letting them know what we've heard and sort of giving an overview of what we think we need to do to this first draft. And then we'll come back August 1st with all those edits compiled in there. And hopefully we're really close at that point, because at that point we need to start thinking about getting it up to the state for a 90-day review. And so during that 90 days, we're going to take a breath. We have some other stuff we can be working on, but that's when our draft goes out to the state for hopefully them to come back and say, this is the best housing element we've ever seen. No comments, you're done, great job. We're not expecting that necessarily. Nobody's ever done that, but hey, there's always got to be a first, right? So even when it comes back in November, we're expecting we'll have a couple of little edits to make. So we may have, we may be able to take a few more comments at that point. The upshot is we're not done. Tonight's not your only opportunity to have your voice heard, but we're getting close to that. So speak up. We want to hear what you have to say. I do want to just say this is not the meeting to debate whether or not we are going to do a housing element update. We're already doing a housing element update. We're a long ways down the road. The city council has invested in a consultant and staff time to do that. So we're here to talk about how we're going to do a housing element update. So we really want to hear that from everybody. So tonight, what you're going to hear is a brief educational background. Marnie's going to give the presentation tonight, as she always does so wonderfully. Not a bunch of time on that, but then we're going to walk everyone through the website. We've got a really great interactive website, how it works, how to use it to comment on the housing element, and a couple of other cool features. We're going to discuss a few sections of the housing element that we're really hoping if you only have time or energy for a couple sections of a housing element to put comments down, the ones that we think are the most important for you to look at. We'd love it if you look at every single word and give us a comment on every single word. But there's a couple of sections we're really hoping everyone's going to take a look at. So we'll explain those and we'll talk about next steps. And as I mentioned, we'll try to answer some questions on the fly tonight, but we do have on our website, which you'll see, a way for us to gather questions tonight. We're going to be writing, we have people taking notes, gather questions. We will upload the questions and put answers on the website in the next few days. So we'll do it pretty quickly. With that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Marnie. Take it away, please. And thank you again, everybody, for coming tonight.
Great. Well, thank you. And yes, we certainly do appreciate everyone attending tonight. And, just participating with us as we go through this process. It's quite detailed. And as I'm sure you've seen with the draft document being 300 pages, there's a lot of information in there. So tonight I'm going to do an overview. We certainly didn't expect everybody to have read the document in the last week or so. As Brandon mentioned, we are in a 30-day public comment period, so we still have 3 weeks to go. We're hoping tonight to give you kind of an overview to orient you towards the document, give you an opportunity maybe to go to those sections that are most interesting to you. And then walk through some of the tools that we have available on our website. So just briefly, quick background, the housing element is part of our general plan. Our general plan is a long-range document. It's usually 20 to 30 years. The housing element is unique in that it's updated on a more regular basis. So right now we're on 8-year cycles. It's also unique in that it must be reviewed and certified by the state. So a little bit about the housing element process. We started with a needs assessment, and that included gathering a lot of demographic information about the community, our housing characteristics. We looked at our prior housing element and what we were able to accomplish over the last 8 years. And then also looking at constraints to development. So all of this information informs the policies, programs, and actions that we're going to take over the next 8 years. As part of this process, state law does require a very robust public review period, which we're in that right now. We've held a number of community meetings up until this point to really educate the community on the process and what steps we were taking. So following the public review, the state's going to also review the document. We're looking for a finding of substantial compliance with state law. We also call that certification. So once we have a certified housing element, our general plan is fully intact and we're protected from lawsuits and other potential pitfalls. So we're going to be working on implementation for the next 8 years. We're really looking for some feedback this evening and over the next couple of weeks on our programs. So what we're actually going to be working on. And all of these efforts, it's not a one and done. So once we certify the housing element, it's not like we put it on the shelf for the next 8 years. We're going to be actively working with this document over the next 8 years, implementing the programs, tracking our progress, and reporting annually to the state on how we are doing. So one of the most critical components of our housing element, as many of you know, is the regional housing needs allocation, which we refer to as RHNA. And just kind of briefly, high level, this starts at the state. The state determines what they believe the statewide housing need is. Once they do that, they parse it out to the different regions within the state. And then the regions parse it out within the cities, within their areas. So the state number has been distilled down to 349 units for Carmel-by-the-Sea. And these are new units that we're planning for over the next 8 years. So we do have a dedicated website that we have set up for this process. And we're going to walk through some of those sections. If you haven't been there yet, this will kind of give you a good overview of what's there. Right on the home page, you have access to the public review draft, which is what we're discussing this evening. So again, we're in that 30-day public review period. You can click on the initial public review draft housing element and download the entire document as a PDF. Or you can go chapter by chapter and you can review the contents on our website. And you have an opportunity to comment on individual sections directly on our website. So this is only one way to review and comment on the document. We do encourage you to use this tool, but we will accept comments via email in any format that you want to submit them. Over on the right-hand side, you can see each chapter listed, as well as the appendices, so you can jump to any section of the housing element during your review. So also on our website, we have an interactive mapping tool. And this is a wonderful way to look at the potential housing sites that we've identified to meet the RHNA and comment on them. So if you've been tracking with us for about a year, we started this process with a feasibility study in partnership with Echo Northwest. They identified an initial 17 sites that could potentially accommodate housing. We've carried those sites forward into the draft document, and we've added some additional sites as well. What you see today on this map, the 35 sites identified, gets us to the goal of the 349 units with a little bit of a buffer. We do have additional sites available. And so we can swap sites out. So we're looking for some feedback on these sites, and you can do this interactively on our website. So you can add a marker, You can drop it on one of the sites, which is identified in blue. And you can comment. So you can select if you're a property owner interested in developing that property, or if you just have interest as a member of the community. And you can provide comments and submit those to us. You also have the option of identifying other sites throughout the village. So if you own a piece of property and you're interested in maybe building an ADU, you can mark your site, property owner interest, and say, I'm interested in building an accessory dwelling unit. So this is a wonderful tool. Please check it out, and feel free to leave as many comments as you would like. And then also on our website, we have our stakeholder survey. The survey is in both English and Spanish. And so what we're looking for here is to get feedback from those that work and live and even visit our community about what they see the housing needs. So it's a 10-minute survey. You can take this online. We're already seeing a really good response to the survey. It's been out for a couple weeks now. We've ramped up our distribution of the survey. So you might see flyers around town at the post office, at the library. We're working with the Chamber of Commerce to distribute flyers as well. So we're really trying to reach as many people as we can to hear from them on what their needs are and what they see as the future of housing in Carmel. So as part of the release of the public review draft, we've prepared a reader's guide to accompany the draft. And this is really intended to be a resource to, again, break down the document into manageable chunks, give you an overview of what is in each section, and then give you an opportunity to go to those topics that may be of greatest interest to you. We're not going to go through the entire document tonight. That would take quite some time, but we do want to highlight some sections for you. As Brandon mentioned, if your time is limited and you can't get through the entire document, we would really love to get feedback on specific sections. So we have 5 chapters, and then we have the appendices A through F. Tonight, I'm going to give a high-level overview of Chapter 2, which is our goals, policies, and programs. Chapter 4, which is our sites inventory, and that kind of ties back to that interactive tool we just looked at. And then Appendix C really supports Chapter 4. So that's where you're going to find a lot of the detailed information about the sites. So we'll talk about those topics in particular this evening. So our draft housing element has 5 goals. All of our programs, policies, are the goals that we're setting for ourselves are to achieve these 5 goals. So we're trying to facilitate housing construction. The city is not in the business of building housing. We're not developers, but we want to be able to facilitate that. We want to protect the affordable housing that we have, as well as improve our existing housing stock. We want to provide opportunities for new affordable housing and special needs housing, exemplify sustainable development, and then also publicize and educate the community on housing needs and resources. So if you find yourself in a situation where you need some assistance, you can come to the city, we can have information, and we can help point you in the right direction. So with regards to Chapter 2, again, if you're limited on time, please take a look at this chapter. This is the work program for the next 8 years. So we really want to make sure that we get our programs right and that we establish objectives that we feel that we can reasonably obtain. So in Chapter 2, there's a number of programs. I'm going to highlight a few of the ones that we feel like are really important and we really want to get some feedback on. The first one is a water distribution policy. We all know that it's going to be difficult for any housing to be built without a water supply. The city does have a small amount of water available. And so one of the programs is to develop a water distribution policy. That's something that would be done in conjunction with the council and adopted by the council. And it would prioritize the water that we have for housing projects. Another program that we proposed are pre-approved ADU plans. So if we hear from the community that property owners are interested in adding accessory dwelling units to their property, we could potentially look at developing some pre-approved plans that they can basically come in, get the plan off the shelf, pre-approved, get the permit, and go start building. Another very unique concept that we're looking at is hospitality employee housing on hotel sites. And this is a really creative program that's tailored to our village. And what it would do is it would allow existing hotels to create on-site employee housing in exchange for an additional hotel suite. Some other programs are process improvements, ways that we can streamline the review process or make it more affordable. Another program, which would be something new for Carmel, is an affordable housing trust fund. And of course, this is something that would need to be sort of financed. So we'd need to talk about different funding sources of what might go into this fund. But the goal is to start building resources to help folks retain housing or to support new housing. Another program, the second floor residential units in the commercial district is something that the city's been doing for quite some time. We have some really good standards in our zoning code that really support this. And so we want to continue this effort and promote this effort as well. Make sure property owners know of the opportunity to convert underutilized space for residential uses. We're also going to take a look at our parking requirements. We know that parking is a premium here in the village, but we really want to look at what our parking standards are for residential projects and whether they're appropriate. So not too much, not too little, and maybe try to get creative with different parking programs because when you're constructing a new housing development, parking can add a considerable cost to that. So we just want to look at that and make sure that our parking standards are appropriate for the types of residential uses that we're looking at. Another program is establishing a minimum density of 33 dwelling units to the acre in the commercial district. And so what this does is it encourages developers to come in with a minimum number of units. So right now we have no minimum requirement. It's 0. And so what this would do is it would really support our desire to facilitate new housing and encourage developers to come in with a minimum number of units just to help increase the housing stock. And then the last program I'll highlight from Chapter 2 are objective design and development standards. This is something that the state has really been promoting as a way to streamline the review process for new housing projects. So the city's one of our suggestions is that we kind of take a look at what we could do to create these objective standards to facilitate more housing in the village. And then moving on to Chapter 4, Chapter 4 focuses on what we call our sites inventory. And this is identifying properties that have the potential to accommodate additional housing over the next 8 years. So again, we've identified initial 35 sites. These aren't the only sites. We're looking for feedback on them. And we can, again, swap them out with other sites in the community. We just need to make sure that we have the right mix so that we achieve our 349 units that we're planning for at the various income levels that the state requires. So again, take a look at the online interactive mapping tool. Feel free to comment on the sites, suggest different sites, we're just really looking forward to your feedback. And if you are a property owner and you are interested in developing housing on your property, even if it's just a junior accessory dwelling unit or an accessory dwelling unit, we really encourage you to fill out our property owner interest form. This is not a commitment of any kind that you're going to build something. It just gives us a sense for what the level of interest is out there as we're planning for the next 8 years. So you can find this on our website. Please feel free to fill it out if you've been thinking about potentially adding a housing unit or two to your property. And then again, our stakeholder survey, this survey is going to stay open through the public comment period. So it'll close around July 6th. It's in English and Spanish. You'll see these QR codes on the flyers that I mentioned around town. So you can scan them with your phone and you can take the survey. And then again, to summarize the next steps, Brandon went through this as well. We're going to be accepting comments on the draft housing element through July 6th. Between July 7th and July 20th, staff in partnership with our consultant EMC will be going through all of those public comments. We'll be preparing responses to those comments. And that's all going to be packaged up and submitted to the state as part of our draft housing element. We will come before the council on July 11th. So a little bit after the public comment period closes, we'll give you a summary of the public comments. We certainly won't have responses to all of them at that point, but we want to give you a preview of what we've heard from the public. Then we'll come back on August 1st with the public comments, the responses to those comments, and then also the revisions that we've made to the housing element in response to those. On around August 2nd, we expect to submit the document to the state for our first review. They do have a 90-day review period, so there's going to be some waiting for us for them to complete their review. So during that time, we're going to start our environmental review on the document, and then we expect to hear back from the state by the end of October. We would love to get that letter of substantial compliance that they can certify our housing element as meeting state law. However, we might get a letter that requests revisions. So depending on what happens, we will either proceed with adopting the housing element or we'll be making revisions and resubmitting to the state for another 60-day review. And with that, this is our housing ad hoc committee of Councilmember Ferlito and Richards. They've dedicated a lot of time to this process as well. And we just want to encourage you all to stay involved. If you haven't already signed up for the listserv, you can do that on our website. Also, just keep an eye out for future meeting announcements in the city administrator's Friday letter. We're also publishing notices in the Pine Cone as well. So we want everyone just to be aware of all the upcoming meetings that we'll be having on this topic. We will be posting the slides from this presentation on our website. And then again, just another plug to take the stakeholder survey. And that concludes my presentation, and we're happy to receive comment or answer any questions.
Thank you, Marnie. Appreciate it. Are there any questions of Marnie by council members or commissioners at this time before I open up the public process?
I have one quick one, Marty. At one point you said you're going to submit something to the state in a little bit early. We don't submit anything to the state until what date?
August 2nd.
August
will be
2nd.
the earliest.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just follow up on that? I have a question on that too, because I was under the impression that we were submitting it earlier, because aren't we now running into the potential that if it doesn't get accepted by the state, that we're going to end up not reaching the December deadline?
It's quite possible. So initially, we thought we would be submitting in July.
Right.
But we have refined the timeline. And the soonest that we can really get it there is gonna be August 2nd. So if the state completes their review and we don't get that substantial compliance letter and we're working on revisions, we may not be in a position to have that certification by December. But we'll still continue to work hard and make forward progress. And that's really the best that we can do.
There's an important caveat I'd like to make to that if I could though. So we have been in close contact with our counterparts at the staff level at HCD along the way, just letting them know we're making good progress. We actually have a meeting with them next week and then the following week in person here. And so the December date has always been, that's the state's ideal submission date. There's actually a 120-day grace period built in after that. So if we don't make the December deadline, we'll still be okay as long as we meet that 120 days. And we feel very confident that we're going to have something within that 120 days. So that's important to keep in mind. And we've heard from our counterparts at HCD that it's pretty common to not hit that December date or your target date. As long as we've been working with them and we'll have something to them, it's clear that we're making the effort. And that's really what they want to see. They don't want to see the cities that are saying, we're not going to do this at all. You can go pound sand to the state. That we're definitely not taking that approach.
Thank you.
Right, Karen?
Yes, during that 90-day review period, will there be any back and forth with HCD if they don't understand something and you can explain something? Will you be meeting with them, or is it just, that 90-day, they're working on it?
I'm Anastasia Aziz with EMC. I think.
Like it's on.
Okay. I'm Anastasia Aziz with EMC. There is an opportunity at 45 days for a more like a mid review check-in during their 90 days. Some cities have benefited from that and some cities have not been able to get a 45-day check-in. It all depends on the staffing levels at the state and the workload of the particular reviewer. However, your staff is in contact with the HCD reviewer, which is great, and cultivating a relationship so that can help to get more feedback during the review period.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Yes, Bob.
Yeah, so based on just one pass of this document, to me, it seems like it's certainly aspirational in that it outlines goals. And beyond that, it's actionable in that it identifies things we can do in the future, might do in the future, will do in the future, some mix of those things. But my question is, to what extent are we making commitments? So to be really actionable, it has to be a plan of saying these are the things we will do. And is this an exercise where the state has kind of said, okay, you have to go check all these boxes, you decide how you want to check them. But then we'll review it and tell you if you did it right or wrong. I mean, is that tell me.
Yeah, so once we adopt our housing element, we are making a commitment to fulfill those programs. We are not penalized if at the end of 8 years, we didn't perfectly achieve all of our goals. What the state wants to see is that we've set a goal that's reasonable, that we can work towards, that will help facilitate housing, whether it's new housing or preservation of housing. So these are firm commitments. As I mentioned, this is our work plan over the next 8 years. Each one of those programs, we're going to be monitoring and implementing and doing our very best to help facilitate new housing.
A good example would be the ADU. So take the pre-canned ADU plans. Let's take that as one of the programs. If this gets adopted in the city council and the planning commission, and we all agree that that's one of the programs we implement, then we will try to create ADU pre-approved plans. And if we don't succeed, but we tried, that's great. Or if we make them and nobody uses them, that's also great. We just won't get penalized for that as long as we take a stab at it.
All right, any other questions? I don't see anything. I'll open it up to the public now. It's an opportunity for public comment tonight. This is, remember, this is about the process, basically. Today, we're talking about the process. With the questions or comments specifically, let's try to get them out.
Is this on? It is on. Hello, good evening. Nancy Toomey, resident. Thank you to everyone who's participated in bringing this project forward to the level that it is. It's a lot of work and it's very definitely appreciated. So I wanted to mention just kind of one aspect of the programs that are proposed here, knowing that you've got a laundry list for me from myself and my husband that were sent to you earlier. Architectural Digest just recognized our village in their 50 most beautiful small towns worldwide as the 8th town on their list, as described, quote, dotted with European-style cottages that house art galleries and special boutiques, Carmel-by-the-Sea serves a perfect starting point to explore the greater Monterey County. Couldn't agree more. Continuing with the quote, there's a lot more to Carmel than coastlines, the excellent local cuisine, boutiques, hotels, and a burgeoning wine scene, end of quote. This is one of many write-ups that accentuates how critical it is that we protect the character and the charm of the architecture of our town overall. Downtown is especially cherished by visitors and residents alike, all with the services, products, and experience that they offer. With this in mind, I am personally concerned that this draft housing element encourages downtown property owners to consider adding second or more floors to one-story businesses. This is significant in the variety of number of stories and roof lines, make all the difference to the look and feel and the charm that we must not risk losing or impacting negatively. Yes, the approach approved for the Dolores and Ocean Edition is a good example of something done right. So I know that's not being built yet, but it has been approved, and that execution of adding additional layer was really very well done. Please do not encourage bypassing critical design considerations that protect our village and downtown and also in the residential district as a part of the potential changes to policy, process, and approvals, zonings, and municipal codes. This design overview and investment that we put into our village over the years is significant and needs to continue. And please know that we do welcome new responsible residents and new housing to our village. So it's not like we want to put a stop to that particular initiative. Finally, our village to some can be viewed as a goose that lays a golden egg for everyone's pleasure and benefit. But please, at minimum, be selective and infrequent, considering second stories being added to the downtown golden goose. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm Tasha Witt. My husband and I live here as full-time residents. Thank you, Marnie and the EMC group for preparing this housing allocation document. I appreciate the hours put in by the committee and the community for a complete and thorough report required to meet the state housing requirements. What is missing from this report is retaining our discretionary design standards. The state does not require us to abandon our discretionary design standards. We should not rely on objective standards only. We should include planning commission review. We should keep the charm of our village consistent. Public input, both online and in person, have consistently asked that the discretionary design standards in Carmel-by-the-Sea be retained. The design and charm of our village is part of our history and heritage, is an architectural treasure, is a major asset to our community that draws both residents and visitors from all over the world. To leave this housing report as objective design standards only and abandon our ability to have discretionary oversight would be to fail Carmel in the past, present, and future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha. Next speaker.
Good evening, Carol Hall, dear Mayor, Council, Commission, staff, and interested parties. Unlike the Toomeys, I have to admit that I have not devoured the 300+ pages of the housing element proposal, but was relieved to hear that existing zoning has been maintained in the present proposal for housing in Carmel. Also, that housing has not been proposed for the residential areas for the most part. I'm for local control and believe others almost universally agree with that stance. The state is playing in our sandbox, and they will likely not stop. However, we realize that we at this point must comply or face serious consequences from the state. That does not preclude us from fighting for local control simultaneously. Given our situation, it would be hoped that additional housing would comply with the basic overlying principles of our design guidelines, as the two prior speakers also spoke to, as defined in the updated guidelines yet to be approved. And these are the 6 principles that we give credit to Victoria Beach for. 1, preserve, restore, and enhance the forest in all improvement projects. Subordinate every built structure to the character and community of the forest, natural environment, and to the natural features of its own site. Fit every built structure within its neighborhood context. Retain and build upon Carmel's architectural heritage. Design every built structure with modesty, and detail every property authentically and consistently. Details are provided for each of these general guidelines. If we are required to provide guidelines specific to state mandated housing, the additional housing would be welcomed much more enthusiastically if it followed our design principles. It is vitally important that we maintain the special character of our village in the forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Next speaker. Anybody in the room wishing to speak tonight? Be shy.
Ken White, resident. A name you probably know, Will Rogers said one time, he said, neither man nor beast is safe while Congress is in session. And I would relate and change that to neither man nor beast is safe when the state Senate is in session. That's how I look at it. All the comments I hear, reading the paper, letters to the editor, sometimes around town, you're walking, post office is simply, why did they get that huge number? We're almost built out. That seems to be a very common denominator here. And so it's the state telling us really what we need to do. When we became a tourist designation of in the world, the state Senate didn't do that. We did. And so we've had 107, 106 years of declaring and doing our own destiny. One of the problems that bothers me the most is, okay, we got this number and we're going to try and solve this by giving the standards the state wants in our planning department. And that's kind of a smooth move. Just, okay, we'll do what you say. But it goes into the general plan and becomes our rules. So I think the problem is what's behind all of this. The thing that nobody's talking about is this is, well, let me put it this way. We couldn't even get a unanimous letter to send to the state or other cities supporting putting on a state ballot this particular issue you're looking at. The people in the state are the ones that should say yes or no, not the state Senate. We have never rolled over in this city because somebody has told us we have to do something we don't feel comfortable with. This is the first time in my life in this city since 60 that we seem to be trying to accommodate a group of people that are not in line with what our philosophy of what our town should be. So I would urge somewhere along the line that the council gets together and decide whether cultural diversity or whatever you want to call it is what we want. And if it is what we want, we should be able to make those rules in the planning department. Not because the state comes down and tells us we have to. I don't feel comfortable at all with that premise that the people of California have had no say on this. Their representatives have, and some of their representatives, by the way, politically are in trouble. Wonder why? So I suggest, first of all, if you feel going ahead with this solution that you have, be really careful. be really careful we end up doing, because it could become the law. And that I don't agree with until more people have a chance to say, this is a good thing to do. If when you hear that, you got it made.
Thank you, Ken. Is there anybody else wishing to speak tonight?
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dave Fahey. I'm a resident. I would like to say, it seems like the emperor has no clothes. We've got an edict, and I don't know anyone who's bought into the edict. I heard that objectives that can be reasonably obtained. I don't think any of those objectives are reasonably obtained. We're going to take the parking away. That's reasonable. I don't understand what we're doing. I'm with Ken. This doesn't make sense to me. We're responding to a state edict. I don't understand. Why do we have to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Linda Calafiore, resident for 18 years. I don't have a quote from Will Rogers, but I have one from Abraham Lincoln. President Lincoln said, "The legitimate object of government is to do for the people what needs to be, but which they cannot by individual effort for it all, or do so well for themselves." Today, we witness an exemplary government in action. I want to commend the many excellent efforts that went into the Housing Ad Hoc Committee report. The document will serve our community well now and in the future, and is aspirational on our path to increase workforce housing in our community. Some have argued that the imposing of a housing mandate by our state is an infringement on our local control and should therefore not be tolerated. I disagree. It takes a village to be a village, and we have the ability to do our share to increase workforce housing in our community. I've heard it said many times that as California goes, so goes the nation. And California has led the nation in a number of ways besides having an economy exceeding many of the world's countries. Specifically, California's environmental protections for our oceans, the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the cars we drive are emulated across the United States and beyond. Yes, we have challenges, the lack of additional water credits being a major one, but we as Californians can explore solutions together. New ways to increase our water supply are continually being explored. By now, many of you have heard about the fog catchers designed to extract water from our atmosphere. If this becomes a reality, just imagine how our foggy Carmel-by-the-Sea could lead California and the nation in these efforts. Bravo, and thank you for a job well done.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak in time tonight? I'm going to dangerously assume that Mr. Toomey is the last speaker, and then we'll go out to Zoom.
I have the shortest speech here. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commissioners, and you guys have done a wonderful job on this. And I did read pretty much the whole thing, and it's amazing. I mean, and thank you, Marnie, for kind of highlighting the areas of focus, because there is a lot of information in there, demographics and other stuff that's interesting, but it's not specifically related to what's going to impact us, I don't think. So I definitely agree with the previous comments, especially on a subjective design guideline situation, because in the report, I mean, when you read it, it really sticks out. It's repeatedly referenced that we lack objective design guidelines, and it's almost like that's where this report is saying we need to be. It also calls out a couple of the design standards that are needed for cultural centers and manufactured housing, which I don't know if that's on the the list of what design guidelines the work group is currently looking at, but all of this needs to be tied back to the incredible work that the design guidelines steering committee and other folks that attend those meetings are working towards. It seems like there's a disconnect in reading the document between their work and what's being said in the document. And I don't know if that has to do with timing because it's referencing, the existing design guidelines or how that all changes. Another area are on the incentives. Obviously we need to work at that to come up with the specifics on, where the sources of revenue are going to be. But I understand from a different meeting that vacancy taxes are only allowed in charter cities. And that's called out in the report. So, it may or may not be an opportunity. And then last thing is on the Eco Northwest study, that seems to be contradicted by the updated EMC study, which is good because, obviously the EMC is a more current document, but I would say review that. Does that Eco Northwest appendix, even need to be in the final submission? Because when I was reading through it, I was like, wow, this is saying something different than EMC. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. All right, see nobody else come up. I'll go out to Zoom world. Is anybody else in Zoom land wishing to speak tonight? I don't see any hands up. Last call. All right. Okay, we'll go back then to public in the room here. One last chance. Anybody wishing to speak?
Good evening. Good evening. I'm a resident. Did not prepare any particular comments, but I just want to raise a couple of issues. I did read the document, Martin, and by the way, it's a very complete document. I sit on the other side of the spectrum, so I would say that I would say that the housing problem is a national problem. So the fact that we can contribute in some way in Carmel to make it easier for the state, I will support that. The one question I would have from the document is there were 35 sites identified initially. In the last document, I only saw 21. So not sure what happened with the rest, the other 14s that were not listed or not shown in this edition of the document. That would be number one. The second one was about ADUs and the fact that some of us could consider, I would like to be considering the fact of building an ADU. How does that relate to the water element? Because I saw that in your list, Marnie, water and ADUs come together. And the third element to that would be the vacancy tax. Some of us decided very much so to become residents of the state, to collaborate, to help instead of being bi-coastal, have a property in a different state that we used to have. And for that reason, I think vacancy tax, I know is referenced before that maybe not applicable. I think it will be an enormous contribution to the city. And I think it should be implemented. Thank you.
Can we get your name for the record?
My name is Maria Roos.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right. Can we close the public comment period, bring it back to the council and commissioners? Commissioners, any questions or comments? Or perhaps Brandon, any comment, closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have just a couple things that I wanted to pick off from the public comment, if I might. Just some points of clarification. I did hear somewhere along the way about second stories and sometimes third stories possibly being recommended in the downtown area. I do want to clarify that we are not recommending third stories. That's one of the things we didn't have to do with this housing element. We do not have to change the allowance of third stories. So rest assured, second stories, which are allowed right now, the way our zoning code is written, are looked at as a possibility, but we are not exploring the possibility of third stories at all. I want to mention there was a conversation, I think Tim mentioned some possible contradictions between the Echo Northwest report and what EMC is doing. I look at it more, and we talked about this, I look at it more as what the work that EMC and staff has been doing has been more building off of the Echo Northwest. The Echo Northwest report was much earlier in the process and meant to be a bit of a roadmap to get us started. So we've definitely been building off of that, and some information from that we certainly have not used. So, and then the last thing I just want to touch on, because I know we've heard this a lot, is the objective design standards conversation. It's important to note that if the city council and our housing element ultimately includes some sort of objective design standard, those would only apply to affordable housing units. So those units that qualify as affordable housing. So your traditional above market rate or above any traditional house, or even the 115 or so that we have to build that are above market rate to meet our numbers, those would still be subject to our subjective design standards. So we're just talking about a program where the 200-ish units that would fall under the affordable categories, one of the 3 affordable categories, would have the benefit potentially of having objective design standards that would serve to make the process faster for them. The thing to remember about objective design standards is that we're the ones that would get to write them if we chose to do that. So we can look at the sort of design ethos that's going on with the Design Traditions Project, what we value here in the city, and we can write very clear yes and no type of guidelines, things that we definitely don't want to see and things that we definitely do want to see. We can write those into objective design standards, but they are not broad sweeping across the entire village. They would only apply to those projects that qualified as an affordable project. And those are the only clarifications I wanted to make, or add a little bit of color to the conversation.
Thank you, Brandon. Are there any comments or questions by council members or commissioners?
Yes,
Karen?
I would like to, is this on? I would like to follow up on Brandon's comment about objective design standards. I didn't quite understand that at the beginning either, but the subjective design standards that we have now often drag out a project to the point it no longer becomes affordable. And as Brandon said, we would get to write the objective standards. It would just be a homework assignment at the beginning of after we get an approval on our housing element. And we would put a lot of vim and vigor and thought into designing or to constructing those objective standards. That would facilitate then later when someone wanted to build a project, they would have a really strict guideline of what that project needed to meet in order to be approved. So this would just give them a very definitive guideline of what was expected. So I think it could be something that we could endorse once we get to that process of actually constructing those objective design standards. And I'm glad Brandon clarified that. Santa Cruz went into quite a long process of coming up with design, objective design standards. And now they're seeing the fruition of that with some of the projects that are coming before them, meeting those standards and then being able to be approved in a more timely manner. So let's not completely fear that. Let's get behind understanding what that means and then working towards really creating great objective standards.
Thank you. That actually there, that reminded me of a couple of points I forgot to make about that, which you alluded to there. The objective design standards would be a lot like the ADU plans that I mentioned earlier, the timing of it. We would adopt our housing element and then we would start working on developing those objective design standards. Those don't have to be done right now. So ostensibly we wouldn't even start working on those until after the Design Traditions project was over. So we would have the design traditions to build off of to create these objective design standards. And what those objective design standards mean is that if your project that you're proposing doesn't fit inside that box, then you have to follow our subjective design standards. So we get to decide what the fast track sort of objective design looks like. And if you can't give us a project that looks like this, you're going to go follow our subjective design standards, even for an affordable project.
And so I just want to clarify, when you talk about objective standards, you're talking about projects that are for low income housing only.
Projects that fit. So there are 4 categories of affordability under the RENA umbrella. The 349 is comprised of 4 affordability categories. One of them is above market rate, and those would just be subject to our subjective design standards. The other 3 are low, or moderate, low, and very low. So if you brought in a project that somehow qualified for those, meaning there's an annual income verification or whatever you need to do to qualify those 3 categories would be the ones that would have the opportunity to design a project that met the objective design standards.
Any other questions or comments by council members or by commissioners? Jeff?
Yes, thank you. I have a number of sort of questions and maybe a few comments, and I'll just go down in the order in the plans, chapter 2, I think, Marnie. On page 2.2-6, R1 motel conversion development transfer rights affirmatively AFFH. I'm curious as to why this was a program that's only geared towards the sunsetting of hotels in the residential district and doesn't include maybe hotels with older stock in the commercial district. So if we allowed, so for example, if we allowed a hotel in the commercial district to turn themselves into affordable housing and sell their development rights to another hotel or a new hotel or whatever, we would accomplish the same goal. We wouldn't have removed the hotel out of the residential district, true, but we might have accommodated the same new 15 units. Does that make sense? So, you know, if one of the older hotels sells their rights and someone builds a new hotel where the three garages are, a pretty empty piece of land. You know, we got 15 new units out of it. We hope that they'll find a way to develop those that the 3 garage parcel is listed as a developable parcel in our list. So we get the units out of it. So I don't understand, you know, I think it should be considered that we allow that conversion process in the commercial district too. I don't see a difference in terms of producing housing. On the next page, I have a question on page 2.2-7. It says, allow at least one on-site affordable employee housing unit in conjunction with 1 new hotel room per unit. And is this one on-site affordable employee housing unit? Is that per hotel or per hotel room? Or it says per unit, but I don't understand what the unit is.
So the idea behind that program is that each hotel would have an opportunity to provide 1 or more on-site housing units. And in exchange, they would get a hotel unit for that housing unit.
So, okay, so my question was, why is it only 1? Why would it not be 1 or more? So that was basically my question. But just to clarify, that would be, you know, a hotel with a parking lot. If they undergrounded some of the parking or managed the parking situation, they could take 2 hotel rooms, turn them into living facilities for 2 people that work at the hotel, and then they could build 2 new hotel rooms on that parking lot or whatever it was on their property. That's the point of that program.
Yes.
Okay. Next down here, right on page 2.7 is pre-approved standardized ADU plans. You know, there's a lot of talk in here about objective design standards, and I have trouble imagining that, you know, just that pre-approved ADU plans would ever work here, because that's basically an objective design standard. You know, here's an objective, you know, you put this thing on your property. And I just don't see, you know, I know we're going to have this discussion when we talk about the ADU ordinance, but that doesn't really seem real to me. So I wrote the word meh by it. That's my level of interest. On the next page on 1.3.e, amend the A2 zoning district. This is the Sunset Center parking lot, right? And that's the only A2 district. And I think it's pretty pie in the sky to think that this community is going to allow a housing unit to be a housing facility to be built on the Sunset Center parking lot with objective design standards. Like, that's not going to happen. I think, you know, what I would imagine, you know, how I always imagined that, this is only me, is the city has some sort of competition or some sort of selection process that includes some design, and the city strikes some deal with some developer and provides the land in exchange for something, like how most sort of housing projects would work. And that's by definition not objective, right? There is a subjective part to that process, right? At some point, there's such a subjective part to it. So I like that this document talks about facilitating housing in that parking lot, because I agree with that. I agree with that assessment. But I think there are ways to incentivize it without, other than objective design standards. So you talk in other places about a housing trust, and maybe some of that money, maybe the housing trust money, could be used to incentivize a better development on the Sunset Center or something that pencils out more or something. But I don't think that objective design standards, especially on that piece of land right next to the Sunset Center, I don't think that that is workable. And
So
yes,
if I could just,
yes,
so with the A2 zoning district, so there's kind of two parts. There's objective design standards and then there's development standards. So our A2 zoning district doesn't even have development standards right now. So like setbacks, height. So I think the goal for that program was to create some development standards for that district. It doesn't necessarily have to go hand in hand with objective design standards, because like you said, there could be other opportunities for getting a really good project. So I just wanted to make kind of that distinction. We're without any development standards at all right now. So we might want to think about adopting those, or maybe we want to pair them.
we're without any development standards, but we own all the land in the A2 district. So it really doesn't, so we really do still control that whatever development goes on in the A2 district. It's not like someone's gonna come in and, you know, build a 6-story building there, whatever it might happen.
Could I ask Marnie to clarify one other thing? Marnie, could you, so I think though, the objective design standards, we're proposing it in a way that's more of like an overlay. So there's like an area that the objective design standards would take place in. Correct me if I'm wrong there, though.
Yeah, so yes.
So,
yeah.
thank you. So one way to look at it too is if we wanted to exclude the Sunset Center site from even being able to benefit from objective standards, we could. That overlay could just not touch the Sunset Center property. So whatever was built there would be subject to subjective design standards, right?
I think you understand my comment.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the use of the word objective is pretty charged, and maybe that's a word that should be removed, or we should find other encouragements for whatever's going to go on in the Sunset Center parking lot. And I know that those things exist. I know that encouragements exist, incentives exist.
I will just add, one of the lenses though that the state is looking at, just for background, is, for example, the A2 zoning district doesn't have any kind of standards for any developer to come in and say, what is the city looking for here? It's very subjective. It's come in, let's talk to you. So the state's really looking for having the standards very clear in all zoning districts. So someone can come in, take a look at the code, see, they could come up with a preliminary design to meet what the city wants, and then talk to the staff and go through the process that way. So they're looking for, let's set the floor, make the floor very clear, and then have it go through the process.
Well, we could put, I mean, by your argument, then we could just put we could have the standard could just be a 4-story building, period.
Or a
You know,
height
fully built
standard.
out with our knowledge, you know, between the city council and the planning commission, that when we went out to find a developer, we would impose additional restrictions on the developer as part of the process to turn this land over to them. So that's really kind of fake, right? Like, you know, all the objective standards are really just kind of fake when we start talking about the A2
So-
anyway.
So
Because
I
we
think,
own that one.
yeah.
Because we own it, because
Yeah.
we own all the
Right,
land.
Yeah,
right.
I think we get the comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Manufactured homes on a foundation system, you know, I couldn't figure out whether we were talking about mobile homes or prefab houses.
It-
Um,
Prefab houses, and this is a government code section. It's state law, so it's in effect now, but the state really wants all these laws now codified in local ordinances as well.
okay. I mostly agree, you know, on the next page, on page 2.9, objective design standards. Yeah, I don't really, I'm really torn about, you know, objective design standards in this community where the land costs so much. You know, I think Karen spoke about standards sort of slowing down the development process and making it more expensive to build housing, but I'm not sure that matters here. Like, to be perfectly honest, you know, we have $1 million lots or $1.5 million lots that people are putting $1 million houses on. And the other side of that coin is our design standards, and maybe the slowness of the process protects some of our older houses from the spec process. You know, one of the things that we see going on is people leaving the community and these old houses being bought and torn down and turning into spec houses, like what happened next door to me, and then this house sells for $4 million. And I'm not sure that I'm a little bit afraid that having an objective design standard will result in more of that happening, not less of that happening, and it will be a detriment to the older housing stock that we have in our community. That serves a very valid purpose, like it does in every other community. So
Jeff, I think Brandon said that would only apply to affordable projects, not across the board in town. So that
Okay.
is a difference.
okay. And then when you talk about plans on page 2.10, there's a plan for, you talk about facilitating or encouraging ADUs. And, my comment on that is before the city, it says here, the city will promote ADUs and junior ADUs on properties. But my ask before the city entered into a program to promote ADUs and junior ADUs was to do some sort of survey and find out whether these things are being lived in. Because it's not my impression, and maybe the people on the planning commission would have a better idea of, our staff would have a better idea, but we built how many ADUs so far?
50,
70?
like 52, I think.
52,
Yeah.
like, there's some ADUs near me, and one of them was maybe going to be used for an elder parent, which I believe is heard a lot, but the other ones are empty. And so I don't want to spend, our housing trust money. I don't want to even say that we're going to spend our housing trust money to encourage the production of ADUs when all ADUs are being used for right now is to, seemingly make our houses bigger. Because I don't think that that's an objective that anyone really agrees with.
So if we could
So-
develop a program that required
Okay.
occupancy and annual reporting, it would be a little bit more palatable.
To me, but I only speak for myself. I mean, I don't know, you have to ask everybody else what they think, but I've always spoken about how we're losing our communities. So yeah, that would make it more palatable to me, but good luck. At the bottom of that page, you say throughout the city, including the coastal zone, and it's my impression that the whole city is in the coastal zone. So that comment seemed like, maybe there's a thing. And then on the next page, you talk about vacancy tax, transfer occupancy tax, and transfer tax. And maybe a little thought needs to go into this in terms of just putting these words down on paper. A lot of it seems sort of pie in the sky, those are really high lifts to do. Well, the TOT is probably the least high of the lifts to do, just my opinion. But the transfer tax requires us to become a charter city, which is a completely different animal than I think what is contemplated in this document. So that seems to be a high lift. And then the vacancy tax comes with, as I know very well, its own bag of political peril. So
I mean, would these be things that you would want us to explore further? So I think Brandon mentioned, once the housing element gets adopted, there's a lot more work still to be done. Is this something that you think we should just kind of take off the table at the outset, or is this something that you would want us?
I would want you to, but I don't, there are 9 other people at this table. So, I'm trying to prevent us from getting to, the July meeting and having all these issues come up, and then we're a little stuck because then we start using up our 90 days and we're in January and February and all that.
Well, this is great. I mean, this is exactly what we want to hear. And it really starts the discussion, and it gives other people an opportunity to consider these topics. And if at the end of the 30-day period, what we're hearing is the majority thinks that this is not a viable program that we want to pursue, we absolutely can take it out.
I think they're all worth considering, my own opinion, but
Could I say something just a second? I hear where you're coming from on this. And we have to keep in mind, this is an 8-year process, so not everything would happen at once. And what may not seem palatable, for example, a vacancy tax now, we don't know what will seem palatable in 5 years. If we're down to 30% real people living here and 70% absentee owners, we may change our opinion about a vacancy tax. So just keep in mind, everybody, that this is an 8-year process once we get certification to work on these programs. So we don't necessarily want to take things out of the equation if they could be helpful in that 8-year period. And they may not come to fruition during that 8-year period, but we may not want to just take them out. And I'm glad you're
Yeah, I
supportive
don't,
of the
I
idea.
guess thank you for the comments. I guess my things are, you know, what I'm trying to do with the climate the climate program is go through that stuff and try to get that stuff into the council's work plan or the city's work plan. And that's what I'm going to do with this too. You know, we're gonna have a list of these plans, and every year I'm gonna go to Brandon, and I'm gonna say, which of these 2 things are we gonna do this year? And maybe try to get some consensus on the council to try to get these things done. And so they need to be like real things that, okay.
Can I just ask? a
Yeah.
question? So if we were to do that, if we were to take some of these things that we're gonna try to get past, would that hurt us in trying to get this document approved? Would that hinder us at all? Like, is what Jeff's saying is if we took these things off, would that make our document less powerful or less apt to pass?
I think, I mean, I'll start. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we have to have some programs, right? And so the more we take off, the fewer programs we have on there, the more comments we're going to see from the state, like, are you really doing enough? But I think to the point that, Jeff was kind of agreeing with, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Barron was agreeing with Councilmember Ferlito, that these don't have to happen right away, and maybe they become more palatable. So, the decision for the folks here around this table is it unrealistic for 8 years, or is it just unrealistic today? And maybe it's possible in 4 years when we try it. So that's really the calculus you have to do in your head.
Thank you.
Can I ask, so are we better off having like higher level topics versus very defined and specified? Because can't we add over the 8 years or not?
Well, I think, so if you think of this as your work plan for the next 8 years, and so, for example, they all do have timeframes as well associated with them. So that establishing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is June 2031. So it's giving you a long time to figure that out, work with various different departments, outside consult, how you would set this up, what it would do. You can, if you find, for example, after a few years, this just isn't going to work. We've talked with these various agencies, we've talked with the city attorney, we've talked with financial, and we just can't get this going here in the city. Then you report to HCD annually and let them know, we tried, we can't do this. You can, I guess, suggest we would like to try this other program instead and substitute it out, or you could say for the next housing element cycle, the 7th cycle, this is what we're going to try instead. And the intent of this Affordable Housing Trust Fund was to provide funding for new residential units or rehabilitation funds for units. Because right now this city doesn't have a funding source for someone who, if, for example, is on a fixed income, has been in their house or home for 40 years and has now a large repair, like a large re-roof repair. Some cities do have low interest loans for that or grants. So that this was an idea to start establishing that fund for those types of programs that the city is currently lacking. So I wouldn't say substitute out. I would say the city would likely just keep report out annually how this is working or not, and then make notes with staff what you would want to do in your next housing element cycle to deal with providing funds for rehabilitation or maintenance or to entice an affordable nonprofit if the city had a pool of money in addition or in lieu of land.
And so it has to be very specific. It can't be like, we're setting up a trust and then we determine as we go through the 8 years what that trust is.
Oh, it can be, we want it to be less specific. That's how, so think, because this is an element of our general plans function at that high sort of philosophical policy level. And so we're creating these programs to say, you're going to create a program that sets up a trust. And we don't have to say, this is how many dollars go in it every year. And this is exactly what the money is going to be used for. So things like, or just high level stuff. So you're correct, Commissioner Allen, that it's meant to be higher level policy language in this.
And moving along.
I have some more, yeah. So on page 212, preserve and increase second and existing third floor residential uses. We've been talking about a trust fund, and this is a great opportunity to sort of use that. Use some of these trust fund monies that maybe we'll have to do this. And I really liked, I just wanted to say I really liked 2.3a. So that's my comment on that. On 2.4a, housing rehabilitation and maintenance information. I didn't really know where to put this, but there's a thing in our our zoning code talks a lot about lot mergers. And we have seen, I know the planning commission has seen a couple examples of people buying a couple of lots and putting them together and building a big house, or people buying lots and tearing the house down and putting maybe non-residential uses on their piece of land. And I think that both of those things, I do think that both of those things should be prohibited. I do not believe that people should be allowed to buy a house, tear it down, and put a non-residential use on there. And I do not think that people should be allowed to buy 2 lots and build a bigger house and remove a house from our inventory. So maybe that zoning code could be expressed in terms of the inventory of housing in Carmel, but we should make sure as a community, and when we, since this is where this belongs, that we don't allow those things to happen. I know they're happening now, and I think that they're detrimental to the intent of this entire document, and we should get rid of them. 3.1a, mixed use affordable housing. I thought that was the same as 2.3a. I couldn't really figure out what the difference was, so maybe you could check it and just do that. At the bottom of page 214, there's the thing about data. There's another thing about ADUs, and again, I say, I'm not sure that these ADUs are being used for anybody to live in at all. So, and then on page 215, you talk about fees. These are not city fees. These are school district fees and sewer fees and all those other fees. And so, those fees can be rather large too. And I think it would be worthwhile for there be something for the city to investigate. If we're going to put senior housing in the A2, if we're going to put deed restricted senior housing in the Sunset Center parking lot, I'm not sure why we should pay school fees for that. And so I think that there's something to be done. I think school fees are those fees are kind of a racket, and I think that we should call it out. And then I think that's it. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Thank you. I want to kind of take a little bigger picture here, because in reading through this, what really kind of jumped out at me was chapter 3 about the demographics. And what we've identified, which we already knew, is that Carmel is the oldest community and probably one of the most richest communities in the area in terms of land value and appreciation. And I think that drives this whole thing we're trying to do. I mean, the community, the figures were, between 65 and 75. And so this community, the majority of this community is going to be gone in 15 years. We're not going to be here. I'm not going to be here. Most of you aren't going to be here either. And that's what housing is all about. And So what, and it's happening right now. This is, this isn't something that's just popped up. This is a trend, And so what's happening is because of the price of the land, any new housing, any ADUs, as Jeff brings up, that are built, they're built because they have found a loophole to get more FAR, floor area. And it's not being rented out as a low income unit. It's being used as just more floor area for whatever they want, And so that's what's happening. And and that's fine. They can do that. They own the property. That's their property rights. And we have very limited ways of controlling the way people use the space on their property. And I'm not suggesting that we should be more invasive about that. But what I'm saying is that we have to understand that what's driving all this housing is the cost of the land, the zoning, and the fact that in a community like ours, which is so small, that we have this old population which is gonna go away. And how is the population going to be replaced? So if you just have zoning and policies which further incur high prices of land, and you don't have density, then you're just going to have financially available people with the funds from outside the community are going to come in and buy more homes or more property, and it's not going to be occupied. And so what's going to happen to our community, and this gets to the community character, which you're all concerned about. There's going to be nobody here. We're going to go from, what do we have now? 50-60% non-owner occupied. We're just going to go higher and higher and higher. And so that's going to affect, the character of the community. Ken said it, cultural diversity. Cultural diversity requires people. And if we don't have any people here, we're going to have no cultural diversity. We're going to have a lot of visitors, that's great, but this community runs on the people that live here. They're the ones who provide the culture. You're all the culture. And all your concerns and all the things that you do every day, what you're interested in, that's the culture, and it requires people. So the whole point of this is, how do we get people here? That's what housing's about. And that's kind of what the state's trying to do. So the whole focus here should be affordability. So all this process you're developing, it's got to result in affordability, So that's got to be the whole main objective. And so if we're going to encourage ADUs, we have to think about how we're going to encourage affordability. And if we're going to, and really, when you have such high property values and such scarcity of land, which Carmel is really scarce. The whole state has scarcity of land, particularly on the coast where people want to live. Inland, that's a whole different situation. So we have to figure out, the whole process should be in all of your, the plans, policies have to be focused on affordability. And I think, I'm just trying to open up a conversation here about this, but it seems like density has got to increase, And so basically it gets down to, where would you put the density? People are concerned about what the downtown looks, and I understand that, and we're kind of, and I know everybody's concerned about the state is handing this down to us, but really as a community, we've got to take this on, because we're a dying community who's forcing everybody out because of the high price of land. We're not, we're not going to reproduce, people. We can't reproduce our way out of this. We've got to bring people in. And the only way we're going to bring people in is if we create more financial opportunities to buy into this community. So that's what I see here. We've got to do. So all the policies and everything should be focused on providing affordability, because that will bring people in. That will provide dynamics to the demographics. It'll provide cultural diversity, all these things which we're concerned about, and that will ultimately affect the character of the community, the built community. So that's kind of how I see this thing.
Ready?
Can I follow?
No, there's no public comment period is closed. Yes, you may.
Thank you.
No.
No.
Stephanie can speak. The public
Yeah,
comment period.
I want to follow up on that, because both Jeff and Michael both were hitting on a lot of the points that are really important to me.
Affordability is the number one thing. When you look at URENA numbers, over half of those units are supposed to be affordable housing. And when I moved into Carmel in 2014, I was a single mother. And I was extremely lucky to get a place that I could afford at that time. When they sold the house, the year my son graduated from high school, I couldn't find an affordable place to live in this town that would allow me to keep my dog. So I think, and I have a great job. And so I think of all of the people who work in our town who are much less fortunate than I am, who can't afford to be here if they wanted to be here. So I think that's really super important. When you look at our numbers now and you say that we've got 50 affordable units out of 3,800 housing units in Carmel, I'm assuming those are foundation housing for the most part. And, you know, I'm sorry we haven't seen another foundation project move forward in the last 20 years. But to find a way to facilitate some of that housing with our subsidized projects such as Mid-Penn Housing, which is doing projects in the city of Monterey, and they're doing housing projects in the Salinas Valley, some way to incentivize them to come in and look at some of these projects or areas where we could build denser housing. And I'm in agreement with Michael on that point. The ADUs, and I work for the water district, I see ADUs come through all the time. They're never, I mean, okay, not never, but pretty much they are not deed restricted for affordable housing. People keep their units. They hope to live in their units, to have their family come or have friends come and stay with them. I don't know, do we have any deed restricted units for affordable housing out of those ADUs that have been constructed?
No, not that we're aware of.
Okay.
No.
So that's a concern, and I think that was already brought up. One other thing I want to think about with the housing trust. So the city of Monterey has a first-time homeowner loan program or an incentive for first-time homeowners. And maybe that would be another thing that we could do if we're able to get housing that somebody could actually afford to help them with their down payments so that they would be able to come here. But finally, the last thing I want to say is it's not just about home ownership, but it's also about renters. And, you know, I think your workforce is primarily going to be renters, and we need to really think about them as well. Thank you.
Sandra, did you have anything?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a couple of questions about things that I feel are vague that we need more specifics on. For example, just the trust fund in general. I mean, we're talking about $1 million in 8 years, and where exactly are we going to be getting that money from? I'm also concerned that some of these things are going to involve an increase in city staff and more government and more regulations and more city employees that are going to have to keep tabs on people, especially like, for example, with the low income, whoever applies for one of these apartments is going to have to prove that they legitimately are low income. And then you're going to have somebody from the staff keep track of that. And then furthermore, when they leave that apartment, you have to make sure that the next person that comes in is also low income and that, you know, you have their paperwork and their income taxes and all the rest of it. But what I'm saying is this is once again another state unfunded mandate, because we're going to have to hire more employees to do this and to keep track of what the state is requiring from us. And I do have concerns with this vacancy tax and how it's just being thrown about. I mean, it's a significant infringement on property rights, and it's certainly something that would have to come to a vote by the public. And mostly I am concerned with some of the vague things that I feel we do need more specifics on, and where that money is coming from for the Affordable Housing Fund. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
So I'm just going to pick up here where some of my colleagues have, and I just want to encourage everybody, read the document. It seems overwhelming. It's not. It took me an afternoon to get through it. It's a lot of data. And Section 3 has a ton of data. Let me just share some of the things that, I don't know, they surprised me, but this kind of puts it's data. 50% of us are over 55. and 36% of us are over 60. I'm 64.
So you're gonna be around for 15 years. The problem is not a threat, eh?
My wife is a year younger than me. She's the youngest person on my block. And my block is 50% occupied, which is the next statistic is that we are 50%. So it's 50% people that live here, and 50% of the units are, they're not vacant, but they're second homes primarily, but that counts as vacant. Income, these go to the various levels of income that are mandated by the state. But again, the data is that of us, 7% are extremely low income, meaning we're at $21,000 or less. 7% of us, people that live here. 9% at 38,000 or less. 12% at $56,000 or less. 10% at $71,000, or those are ranges actually. But bottom line is that 38% of us are at or below the median income of the county, and the median income of the county is $71,000. And granted, a lot of us, when you're retired, sometimes you don't have a lot of income because you're living off your net worth. And I'm sure that's buried in some of these statistics, but those numbers surprised me. 43% of us are renters. So 57% of us own our own homes. So the comments my colleagues are making about this community is becoming hollowed out, I think are demonstrated by the statistics. And that should get us motivated. Some of you know, I moved here from Telluride, Colorado, which is a ski town. The same thing was happening there, that all the homes were going to second homeowners. The place was packed at Christmas, New Year's, and the 4th of July. I always say you can judge the character of a community by what it's like on Halloween. You know, a vibrant community has kids trick-or-treating, high on sugar, families out. That's not this place. I mean, this is the kind of scary version of Halloween, right? But what I can say about what the community of Telluride did, Aspen is similar, and there's plenty of other stories. 40 years ago, they realized the need for housing. And they made plans like these plans that seemed absurd at the time. But they made them. Over 40 years, people acted on them. And today there's 1,500 units of workforce housing, all various flavors of that, not necessarily low income. Some of those are deed restricted, and the only real restriction is that they have to be occupied by a worker, no matter how much the worker makes. But it keeps it allows your lawyer and the general managers of the hotels to at least live in your town, right? When I looked at this, and I'm with you on a lot of you folks on this, what the state is shoving at us. And I don't like it. I mean, we see it with the ADUs. They shoved at us basically saying you must approve ADUs. And on the planning commission, we see some of them only if they're included in something we otherwise have to approve, tear down a new thing. And Jeff, to your point, I think 90% of them are, it's just a way to build a 2,600 square foot home on a 4,000 square foot lot. And, the state gave us that mandate, but they didn't give us any tools to make those ADUs be filled. They didn't say you can ask for a deed restriction. They basically said you just have to approve them and forget about the use. So it's sort of a half-baked mandate. And I think this one is too. But when I read this thing, I just ignored the number. And it's all right, 395, that's absurd, because I have the experience from another place where you can achieve absurd over time, or achieve what seems to be absurd over time. And then I just read the document. And didn't really worry about the number or the percent of low income and this income, et cetera. And it's really a good document. I think all of the elements of the plan are achievable if we want them to be. You know, I think to make housing really work, you need land, you need money, you need will. And you need a really good plan and you just got to get after it. So I think you've done a good job here. But it's just a start. And I think we got to get serious about whether we want to do it or not. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Byron. Say no applause, please. Okay, Karen.
Yes, I'd like to say something. I have 3 college educated children, 2 with additional professional degrees. None of my 3 children could come and live here unless I die. And that concerns me because I think we have become a priced out community for certain people. And I think that takes a little out of our community. As far as the ADUs, I think the state didn't want to deed restrict or require them deed restricted because they felt that that might preclude people from building them because deed restrictions go when you sell your property as well. So we have to make a generous assumption that at some time, perhaps those ADUs will be occupied by a caregiver, by a child who comes home from college and doesn't quite have a job yet. Or actually, I read an article just in the last couple of days where children are offering, adult children are offering to build an ADU in their parents' backyard so that they can live in it. So we are in a changing America. We're an aging America. There are some excellent documents that I've been able to find. This one in particular, Making Room for a Changing America, Housing for a Changing America. And you can access all of these, whether you're an AARP member or not, by going to their, they have a whole series, actually. They have series on ADUs. They have series on all kinds of things in their livability section. So you can go to aarp.org/livable. And they will send you these wonderful documents, which really explain, you know, we have more single mothers living in homes. We have a lot of people in Carmel that are cash poor, house rich, and they can't even afford to move. And maybe an ADU for them would provide security on their property. It would help them with a cash infusion. I think we have to try to look at the positive sides of it. I don't particularly like that ADUs are taking room out of the forest, but I understand the need for them. My husband grew up in Argentina, and down there, people have a house, and then one of their adult children gets married, and so they build on a house similar to our ADUs. In a few years, the children start having children, and the older folks move into the smaller unit, and the growing family moves into the larger house. And then son number 2 comes along and they build on another story. So this is something that has happened all over the world for years. We're just starting in our community to see it and understand it. But I think the comments tonight have been very good, and this is what we want to hear. And I just want to thank all of you for being here, being part of the solution, and helping us figure this all out, because it is going to be an interesting 8 years. I'm already counting on us getting a certification because of all the good work we're doing. But this is just the beginning of the work that we will want to do to make it work and make it actually come to fruition. Thank you.
Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Al.
So I actually share your same sentiments about the ADUs. I have tons of family and friends where either their older children are living with them or their elderly parents are living with them. And I think you made a very valid point. If we're all getting older, maybe a caregiver lives in them. So I believe that ADUs and pursuing the ADU option is a good one. I am strongly opposed to a vacancy tax. I don't believe that
that would ever be necessary. I am super concerned about the resources. I share the concerns around the fact that as this plan goes into effect, as this becomes successful and more people come into our community, it will require more resources. And whether that's additional hires within city government or within our departments within the city, or whether that's water, that's huge. And so those are things that we will have to work out as we go along. I think that we should strongly focus on elderly housing. I think that that's super important. Might even be a little self-serving because I feel like I couldn't even afford my house if I retired. So could we provide some elderly housing so I could just move right into there? And then I would like to stay away from making any adjustments or exceptions or incentives or rezoning changes because I feel like if we follow our guidelines, since we put so much effort into them, I feel that they're strong enough to be able to handle any sort of applications that are coming in for new housing. I actually think that creatively we could do this basically all downtown and in the sites that you have proposed. So I think it's realistic, but we do need to consider all of the resources. And I'd like to stay away from any sort of multi-family housing, just because it just doesn't feel like this community. And then parking is such a major issue. So I would like to stay away from anything that takes away parking, because I feel like that's just going to become more and more of an issue. And if we're building in areas and taking away parking, then we're just going to have a bigger issue with that. And I think that's it.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, thanks for the work. I think it's a good first draft. I'm excited that it's open still. And so anybody that's out there that's heard anything or something that's came to their mind that they'd like to add or put in or question, this is the time. This is our document. It's ours, all of ours. If you don't understand why we're doing it or what we're doing, reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer your questions on why we're doing it and what we need to do with it. I think everybody's driven for different reasons for this to happen, but I'm happy to explain why I think it should happen. And I would do that personally, and my phone number is easy to find. So thanks again for all the hard work that you guys have done. It's really amazing. And I think we're going to hit it out of the park. I think that the state is going to like it. I think the state's going to appreciate all the time, effort, and creative thinking that we've done with the water, with the hotel rooms, with all these different things that we are trying to accomplish this goal. So congratulations for you guys, and thank you.
I have one more thing, Dave, when we've got this nice room full of people. I didn't see much, and maybe it's not appropriate, but I think at this point, we only have 4 employees that live in our city. And I asked at the foundation, and they have a 5 to 7 year wait list to get into the foundation. I think those things are important to know and to consider. And I'd just like to see if they could be added possibly. Also, I wanted to tell you that I think that we rent out, doesn't the foundation rent some of their parking? Because not all people in the foundation drive anymore. So parking is one of those things that if you live in a 15-minute walk city, which we almost qualify to be, that you can get services within a good walking distance. A lot of people choose anymore not to have cars. So that is something that, we can look to the future too.
So I'll enter my opinions here, I guess. First of all, I'm not that impressed by the ADUs. Frankly, I think they're a little bit of a farcical process. I mean, frankly, there's no guarantee they're going to be affordable. I think affordability by design is kind of a misnomer also. I don't like the fact that we have no control over them being affordable. I think there are additional bedrooms being put on people's houses. I've heard the argument so many times that my grandmother's gonna come and live with me, and that's why I built a house this way. And it just doesn't work. I mean, so I think I'm kind of cynical of that. I also think that waiving parking standards is unacceptable. I think parking is a big problem in this town. I think if we go ahead and raise parking standards for any kind of housing, especially ADUs, I think that's a problem. I think that the process we have before us is unfortunate. I wish we didn't have to go through this, frankly. I think it's gonna divide the community, and that's unfortunate. I don't like that at all. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to go ahead and do these things, and I don't really like it at all. There was one other thing, what was it? Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, the possibilities of deciding, coming up with a housing formula like the city of Monterey has. These are good things to do, but I think they can't be forced on us. I think if we go ahead and have these mandates come upon us, it's not the way we should be planning things. We should be more proactive, not being forced to do things. I feel we're being forced to do this. Sorry to say that, but that's what I feel. Is there anybody else with any comments? Yeah, I want to thank you guys for coming. No. I'm sorry, the public comment period is closed. So now I know that's frustrating, but that's the way it works. You have a traffic comment and a public comment. So there's going to be plenty of other opportunities. I was going to make my comments at the July 11th meeting, but we've obviously done some work today. Nothing definitive that's been said tonight. It all has to go through a process. I just want to let you know that we have to go through this process. Go ahead, hearing from the public, and that's unfortunate. That's a fortunate thing. We do hear from the public. Most important part about public hearing is public process. So that said, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Much appreciated.
Mr. We're adjourned. I'd just like to make a quick plug to everybody in the audience. So visit our website. We want to hear from you. If you want to call us, come to our offices. We're happy to take your comments. There's a lot of ways to get your thoughts into us, but we're still taking those comments. So please visit our website.